Hello, this is Dr. Stowe again. Thanks for coming back for part 2 of chapter 4. Be sure and read the text carefully, and particularly page 93. You might want to open that now. It has a listing of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. I'm not expecting you to memorize which one, the numbers, and which one they are, just the general concepts and issues that the book deals with as they apply to business. Again, we have talked about the American exceptionalism and that concept, and it's an important one because our Constitution is designed to, in effect, limit the power of government and the power of any one person within government or within a particular branch of government to become a ruler as opposed to a servant of the people. And that, again, goes back to our original history. Obviously, there's some hypocrisy involved with the issue of slavery. That was a huge conflict during the actual writing of the Constitution, and they spent some 6 months in a hotel. The hotel owner said, look, your bill is going to be huge. I want to be paid, so let's get on with it. And though this story is true, it doesn't make many of the history books, and unfortunately the one big hang-up issue was slavery. Later, abolitionists were people who were generally very, very religious, and one of them, Henry Ward Beecher, was a preacher. He had the largest church in the United States. It seated something like 2,500 people, one of the largest buildings in New York at that time, in Brooklyn, New York. And he preached and was very much against slavery. He even passed the plates and collected money and used that money to buy what he called Beecher's Bibles, but they were actually guns that were provided to people living in Cincinnati, Ohio, which was the place where the Underground Railroad was formed, and he helped organize it, and some of his family members helped run it. The Civil War had to do with, in part, whether the federal government had to recognize the right of Southerners to come into the North and, in effect, kidnapped those slaves who had escaped their plantations. From that, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yes, she is my great-great-great-grandmother. And she wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin that Lincoln said had some effect in starting the Civil War. The first Bill of Rights has to do with freedom of speech. And the so what to business narrows into a couple of issues. One is, does business have freedom of speech? And the answer is yes, but the Supreme Court defines it as commercial speech and acknowledges that the government does have a right to somewhat manage and control that speech. The big example of this is the Federal Trade Commission under federal law is authorized to punish organizations that put out false advertising because that can affect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. The other issue that's been the book talks about, and they've got several paragraphs on this, is the whole issue of freedom of expression and the issue of pornography. The Supreme Court has defined pornography as what a community and its own standards have. The problem has been that in drafting legislation against online pornography, the Supreme Court has found that the federal law attempts to regulate this have been too broad, and they're big into artistic expression, if you will. The one area where the laws have been upheld against pornography involves child pornography, And this does come under federal law, and it's fairly serious to engage in the transmission of child pornography. Believe it or not, when you pass on a sexting picture, inappropriate picture of someone who's under 18, you can be labeled as a child pornographer. Even though you didn't take the picture, if you pass it on, you're liable under that law. So the laws are very strict on online with respect to child pornography, not so much with the adult. The other issue is freedom of religion, and there are two elements here. One is that the Constitution does not say freedom from religion. It says that the government must not pick a particular religion. It must not establish a religion, but rather people are free to exercise whatever religion they have or don't have. And yes, the Founding Fathers had agnostics and atheists among them, so they were very careful to express it in both ways, and the Supreme Court has continued that tradition. From the standpoint of employers, when you get to employment law, you'll see that there are a number of cases involving when an employer can require that people wear a uniform and not religious garb. But the chapter here doesn't get too much into those details. Due process and equal protection, that's actually under the 14th, well, under the 5th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, which carries this to the states. There are two areas. One is procedural due process, which means we have a right to a hearing before a neutral decision maker, even when that neutral decision maker is employed by the very agency that has responsibility for writing and enforcing and investigating breaches of law. What's required is that the administrative judge or hearing person cannot be the investigator. They only have responsibility for hearing a case, and they have to be neutral. Substantive due process involves the fundamental rights themselves, like right to travel, privacy, voting, and so on. The 14th Amendment also carries this equal protection clause to laws that might apply to specific groups, and there are 3 levels of scrutiny under which the Supreme Court has defined for itself. Frankly, under strict scrutiny of things involving race, national origin, citizenship, there has to be demonstrated a very compelling reason for identification of a group for special treatment. Intermediate scrutiny is where substantially the issue is related to important governmental objectives. And I just invite you to page 104. They've got examples in there. The rational basis test, in that, the Supreme Court is basically warning you, if they're going to apply that test, it's hard for a law to fail constitutionality under that level of scrutiny. Take a look at the chapter. It explains this quite well. Here I want you to print out this particular slide about Griswold versus Connecticut. The book leaves it out, but it is really what set up the whole privacy thing. And I know it's hard to relate abortion to privacy if you don't understand this particular case. It involves birth control, restrictions of sale of birth control. It existed since 1879. A couple wanted to challenge it. They bought some birth control, showed it to a policeman, went home, engaged in certain activities, and they were arrested in their home. The Supreme Court found that there is a basic right of privacy. They described it as the most comprehensive of rights. And that is how we got to legalizing abortion, removing it from state control to a core federal constitutional privacy issue. Please read carefully pages 104 to 108. Take a look at Exhibit 4-1, federal legislation relating to privacy. This is very well described. I just comment a little bit, have some comments here about certain of these acts. For healthcare students particularly, you've got to understand the HIPAA regulations related to the use of patient medical information. We note that there is a controversy right now over the Obamacare website because evidently it's lacking some hacker protection, and so the information you put on there could be obtained by hackers. So that's got to be plugged up, and eventually I'm sure they'll get around to it. For the financial services industry, they are required to inform customers of how they use the information for bank customers and so on, who they're providing it to, and it gives their clients or customers certain rights to prevent them from using that information. People in marketing or HR. States, you need to know, are allowed to sell criminal records to third parties. They're also allowed to sell information on your driver's license to third parties. We know that sex offender lists and photos are on websites. Court records are also available through the internet, and that can reveal your name, address, social security number, enough for ID theft. So this is a huge issue yet to be really worked out. Credit card data. We know from recent Target hacking that's a huge problem for society, not just Target, as 70 million or more records were compromised. So these are issues that relate to privacy and that you should be aware of as a person in business. If you operate your own website, you better be careful to have the right security to it. The other issue the book talks about has to do with the Patriot Act. There's been a controversy over the amount of data that the federal government is storing. The issue is every phone call has been logged into this huge data bank, and some people think that actual phone records, more than phone records, actual conversations are recorded. I wouldn't know. There is a special court that the Patriot Act set up where government has to go and get a warrant in order to tap into these sources. But, of course, that court is secret because otherwise you'd be disclosing who the targets are of terrorist investigations. All of this is very complex because it raises the issue of how much information do you want government to have, and the balance between security and privacy. In closing, be sure to review the learning objectives. Be sure that you've read the book. I haven't had time in a PowerPoint video to do a full lecture with the notes all written out for you. I've just touched on some highlight issues. Our exam on Tuesday, there is a special quiz on Chapter 4, and I'm calling it PPT Chapter 4 Quiz. There's also an exam on Tuesday on Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Please bring a Scantron and pencil. The questions are either true, false, or multiple choice. They'll be between 40 and 50 questions on the test. Good luck, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.